Welcome to the Language Fuel podcast. Our mission is to fuel the teaching and learning of languages worldwide. I'm your host, Joanna Smith. Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Language Fuel podcast. Today on the podcast, we're talking about games. Are games just a silly time waster to use in the language classroom, or is there really anything that's of value? I think a lot of language teachers can, unfortunately, have a bit of a negative attitude towards games and think that they're just wasting time when really they need to get on with preparing students for the exams that are coming up next term or next month or next week. Well, I am here to tell you that there are wonderful pedagogical and linguistic benefits for playing games in the language classroom. So first of all, when language students are playing a well-designed game, there are usually lots and lots of repetition in the game. And that repetition where it's themselves repeating a sentence again, or they're hearing their classmate say the same sentence, just naturally because that's how the game is played, that repetition really cements the target language. So rather than asking your students to get all serious and start memorizing their target vocabulary for the exam next month, play a game where the repetition for that target vocabulary is embedded in how to play the game, and they won't even know that they're doing memorization work. It will just happen naturally. Another wonderful thing for games is that it gives a lot of psychological safety for the students who are playing the games. Games typically have rules. It's my turn now, and when I'm finished, I pass the dice or the counter or whatever it is to the next person around the circle or around the table. And that very clear turn taking enables all students to suddenly be on the same playing field. So if somebody's a little bit shy and normally wouldn't go ahead and speak up in class during a game, it's their turn, everybody's quiet and waits for them so they can go ahead and safely say their bit. And for those who tend to, let's just say, dominate a conversation maybe because they're the extroverts and they're loud and they know the answer, they actually have to practice waiting their turn, and it's not their turn to speak, so they can practice listening. And so in that way, the social dynamics of a group become quite flat and everybody takes regular turns. And it's wonderful for students who don't normally do too well when they have to find their own way in a social situation. It can break ice for new students, and it can break up cliques if you find you have a few developing in your classroom. Another wonderful thing about games is it takes the attention off of the teacher. Rather than the teacher needing to be the one presenting information or asking for input or putting people into groups or asking and guiding the interaction the whole time. After the game has been explained, students know how it works and they can run with it, and the teacher can literally step back and just observe and take the time to listen, figure out where the pain points are for the student. Does student X over there actually have quite a problem with pronunciation that you may not have picked up before because you hadn't had time to listen? Or does student Y over there really struggling to remember the vocabulary that we taught last week? Or perhaps student Z over in the corner is really doing extremely well and you hadn't realized before because they're perhaps a little bit quieter during class sessions. So by allowing the students to take control of their interaction, the teacher can really have a little bit of space to focus on understanding where students are at. And another reason why games are so good is because it brings a real fun energy to a classroom. Any boring classroom is not going to be optimal learning conditions by anybody's standards. Whereas a game, again, well-designed games, usually have an element of strategy as well as an element of risk, or chance, I should say. So when students have a little bit of strategy, they automatically start to think, how can I beat the system? What is it that I can do? And their brains start going overtime as to figuring out what they need to be doing. And of course, the risk and the chance element in a game, the roll of the dice or which card am I going to pluck, just brings the excitement level up a little bit further and helps people to be really in the moment. Now, if you don't have those times in a classroom, you can just be so boring, and your classroom can be such a drain on people's energy. They're not going to have fun, and they're not going to want to, participate much longer, and may choose not to continue with the subject simply because the class doesn't make them feel good. So while we can't have this positive and excitement energy all of the time, it's a fantastic way to definitely bring it in and to energize the classroom a little bit when you need to. And you can also up the energy by adding a prize if you're into that sort of thing. Just don't call it gambling if the management is asking. So those are a few amongst many reasons why it's wonderful to bring games into the classroom. And I wanted to share with you a little bit about best practice in terms of how to incorporate games into your lessons. Now, yes, some people say, well, for the reasons of the energy and so on, just save it for a Friday afternoon when everyone's a bit knackered. Get the game out, at least you have a little bit of energy. Well, I think that's actually shortchanging yourself as the teacher and the students. You're not giving them the full advantage that you could by using a game well. So I've come up with an acronym called PLAY, PLAY, and this is one way to embed games into your lessons and your curriculum. So the P stands for prepare. To make the most of any game, you really need to prepare several sessions, not just one during the game playing itself, but several sessions working up to the game playing. Now, what are you going to do during the sessions before the game? Well, that's where the L from play comes into it. L stands for learn. Students may need to learn a few things before they can actually take part actively in the game that you have planned for them. So for example, there may be some grammar structures that they hadn't encountered before, or that is the target of the game. You may need to take a little bit of time to do some explaining and slow scaffolding for them to be creating the structures that they're required to learn. It may be vocabulary that they need to learn if, for example, the game is on a topic of Christmas or some current event or traveling or whatever it might be. There could be a bunch of vocabulary work to go on, and clearly pronunciation as well, particularly in games that require a lot of speaking. You may as well get them repeating the speaking in a way that's helpful for them in the sense of practicing and cementing great pronunciation. After there has been some learning activities, we then move on to the A in play, and the A stands for activities. So rather than doing the whole game all at once, which could be too much of a leap for students who hadn't played it before, I recommend breaking up the game into small activities and just practice the activities, perhaps in small groups or different groups practicing the activities together. And once they feel very comfortable, then you can put it all together and go ahead and have the game itself to take up. And then by that stage, students have practiced and learned the prerequisite knowledge, and they have done a few practice activities. So the game itself should actually just be fun and practicing rather than necessarily learning new things. And the final letter in play, the Y, stands for yet again, because a well-designed game can be played over and over again. Now, you may not want to be practicing the same vocabulary, because once your students have it, after a certain amount of repetition, that will become boring if there's not actually learning taking place. But the same game may be able to be played with different vocabulary. So the same rules of play, the same activities, but with a different vocabulary set. And you can move through the stages of preparation for the game much quicker because the students already know how to play the game. It's just a matter of substituting vocabulary. And again, it should be fun, so they should be very excited when you say we're going to play this game again. So the Y stands for yet again. Never ever play a game just once. You can certainly get it multiple times in your lessons. So to illustrate how this works, the PLAY, prepare, learn, activities, and yet again, I'm going to tell you an example of how I have done this with English learners. These were adult learners of English, perhaps at an intermediate level or maybe even upper intermediate. And the game that we were playing was from one of my favorite books of all times, which is Pronunciation Games by Mark Hancock, Cambridge University Press. If you are an English teacher and you are not familiar with this book, it is my strong recommendation to grab it. I think I've played every single game in it multiple times with many different classrooms over the years. Anyway, this is a one-page photocopiable resource that I absolutely love. Page 77, the link maze. Now, the target of this game is practicing English pronunciation and in particular the linking function. So that is when you join words together in certain ways. So rather than saying, well, let me find an example here, day and night, we actually join it together day and night. Now for a native English speaker that's obvious and we never thought about it, but for people learning English that would usually say day and night, to get them joining their words together helps them not only to sound more fluent to other people, but to hear other people better because that's how native speakers are doing it, and they don't necessarily realize that the words don't have crisp, clear endings, because they do in some languages. Some languages do crisply finish words between each other. Anyway, so in terms of the preparation part, the P, I would probably spend about 3 different 2-hour lectures on this activity. I wouldn't just do, and this is a one-page photocopiable resource. I'm talking about 3 separate lessons, which is 6 hours worth of lesson planning just to do the one game. In terms of the learning, naturally there needs to be the theory involved. So this particular game is practicing vowel linking. So linking when one word finishes with a vowel and the second word begins with a vowel. But I would have already taught, or perhaps will teach at the same time, the other different types of linking that there are. So there's consonant to consonant linking and so on. So there's definitely a bit of instruction, a sort of a presentation, some example sounds, with me having a lot of the floor time simply to present the information and help them physically to practice that. So there definitely is a presentation phase. Certainly the words that are in this game from the resource, I would have had to make sure that students actually understand it. Now, this is quite a simple vocabulary set, so if I'm just using the predetermined vocabulary, for an intermediate level student, there's not much that people needed to learn. But I would, if I had changed the words to have different phrases, I'd make sure that we had pre-taught the vocabulary in the game. In terms of the activities, before I gave them the actual handout, I gave them a list of the words that were on the handout. So yes, that took a little bit of time for me just to type it out, but it's really not, time consuming. And I broke it up into groups of perhaps 3 people. 3 is good because nobody can kind of hide. Once you get 4 or more people, you can tend to get 1 or 2 people who do all the talking, but a group of 3 is wonderful. So a group of 3 might just get 2 or 3 phrases. They've already figured out how linking works. They've had that presentation. They already know the vocabulary. So the only thing that group needs to do is to figure out how to pronounce, using the theory that I've taught them, those words that I've given them. So that group of 3 may only have 6 phrases. So they'll have 5 to 10 minutes to get those phrases right, saying it, linking it naturally. And I'm not necessarily there to correct them. Their peers, the other 2 people in that group, say, yep, that's how you're saying it, or no, you've got it wrong. And if there's any arguments, which no doubt there always are, they'll put up their hand and I'll be wandering over to their group and help them figure out what the right way is to pronounce that. So that might take 5 to 10 minutes. Then I would mix up the groups. So group A that had 3 people, I'll take 1 from group A, 1 from group B, and 1 from group C. They've all had different phrases that they've practiced many times, so they're very confident with. They now teach different people their own phrases. And as a learner, I'm, as well as teaching 2 other people, I'm learning their set of phrases that they had. So they're becoming familiar with all of the phrases from the actual game during this pre-game activity. And they'll again say it multiple times as they're practicing, hearing each other, making a judgment to whether or not their classmates getting it right, and so on. Once everybody's confident, you can tell because the energy starts to drop and people start to feel bored because they've got it. They've got their own phrases. They've got the phrases that their classmates showed them. They've said them, hopefully, nearing on 100 times by now, which is wonderful. Fantastic revision. So as soon as the energy starts to reduce and people are getting bored, then it's time to play the game. So then I would break them up again into different groups so they're not always with their friends and so on, and give one sheet of paper, and I would photocopy it quite large, between maybe 4 or 5 or 6. And it's a group competition. So group 1 is competing against groups 2 and 3 to see which group is going to be the first one to complete this exercise. So the game itself is a labyrinth. They need to get from the center into the edge by pronouncing the words correctly, and there's a little key which says if you do this linking sound, turn left, if you do this linking sound, go straight ahead, and if you do the final linking sound, you turn right. So they all know how to pronounce the words. There's no theory, there's no practical issues there. They all know it. It's just a matter of doing it together, agreeing on it, and then trying to get out of the maze. And again, because it's new people, they're saying it over and over again, and the excitement is high because there's a time issue. They're beating the clock. They're beating their classmates. How fast can they get out of the maze? And inevitably, the first group finished has actually come out in the wrong place, and they've got something wrong in the chain. So then they have to go back and figure it all out. And they're saying it again and again and again, but it's fun. It's not boring repetition because they want to be the first one to get out and get it right. So they've done that as a group on a big piece of paper, and there's prizes for the winner if there is something in the prize kitty or something like that. And then for homework, I would give them an individual copy, and I'll say, look, you as a group did this on one piece of paper. I'm now giving you your own individual copy so that you can do this at home. And everybody does that homework. It always surprises me that they still do it, even though they've said those phrases over and over again. So that's how I would break down the activity, the major activity, into lots of small activities to get the most out of the exercise. And then after we've had one experience of playing that game and it being fun, all I need to do as a teacher next time round with the next lot of vocabulary is substitute the phrases on that handout with phrases that have come from readings that we've just done recently, or listenings that we've just done recently, or perhaps a newspaper article that we've read together, or a news clip we've watched together. I've picked out some phrases that I've heard the linking, and they figure it out. They already know the theory, so it's a real fun way to repeat that exercise. So there you have it. There's an example of how to make the most of games. And gamification is a big buzzword in the e-learning industry at the moment. People can make lots of fun resources online, but honestly, as I've just explained, a one-page photocopiable resource can be a fantastic game. And thank you for listening to the Language Fuel podcast. You can navigate to the show notes and links via our homepage at www.languagefuel.com. See you next time. Rather than necessary, but I've got nothing. So have a bit of fun, experiment, make the most of it, and enjoy. I will see you next time.